I met the woman my husband had never been able to forget in the oil painting class at the Lifelong Learning Institute. She was kind, lovely, and had never married. I knew right away because the assignment she turned in had my husband Elliot Harrington's unmistakable touch on it. They had been secretly seeing each other behind my back for more than 30 years, they even ran an art gallery. I lowered my head and stared at my rough, calloused hands, and tears filled my eyes. Was his work one of his most treasured pieces? He had never shared it with anyone. Filled with romance and passion, I had been taking care of the everyday grind of life until I abruptly realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life looking like this 65-year-old. I had spent the majority of my life at home, taking care of my family and raising my son until he had children of his own, but only recently had I thought that even in my later years, I might be able to develop a shared hobby with my husband. I discovered a sliver of time that was all mine, so I enrolled in an oil painting class at the Lifelong Learning Institute. At the registration desk, a graceful and elegant woman stood with a quiet grace that time had been exceptionally kind to. "Excuse me, but I enroll in the oil painting class now." Her hair was all silver, but her skin was brilliant, and her presence was striking. She was the type of lady who had been loved her entire life and never had to put in needless effort to get by. She turned to face me with a kind smile. "Yes, this is the painting class, so we're classmates now," she said. I had stepped forward, inexplicably drawn to her, compelled to speak. Maybe deep down I had always longed for a life like hers, unfettered, effortless, untouched by exhaustion. "It was wonderful to meet you, Eleanor." She had a natural charm and an openness that made it impossible not to like her. We instantly became friends. I spent the entire day with her, and by the evening, when we were standing outside the university gates, it was delightful. Eleanor turned to face me. I shook my head quickly, feeling a deep-seated sense of inferiority. I still had to go home and make dinner for my family, but thank you for the invitation. As soon as I said those words, I felt like a silly, embarrassed child, clutching my old black tote. "Would you like to grab a quick bite or perhaps go for a spa session?" Rushed away, turning my back on her, and my whole body shook as the sobs I had been suppressing finally came out. I had seen Eleanor only a week prior, on the day I initially arrived at the Lifelong Learning Institute, when she was submitting an assignment for our painting class. The instructor presented it as a painting by her long-term boyfriend, which she had meticulously replicated. It was so beautifully done that the instructor displayed it to the class, and I instantly recognized it from the other side of the glass window as being in my husband's distinctive style. Decades of marriage had created an unspoken understanding between us, but it was in that very moment that I was faced with a cruel, unavoidable truth that made my heart twist painfully in my chest. It was one of Elliot Harrington's most treasured pieces, one that he had never shown anyone. Eleanor continued to share her story of love with this mysterious man, which lasted for more than 30 years, amid the cheers and encouragement of the class. It was ironic because the man in her story was the same man I had dedicated my entire life to since I was in my 20s, and now I was compelled to. I wasn't prepared to accept it, so today I returned because as I listened to another woman describe the intense, long-lasting love she shared with my husband, a sharp, uncontrollable tremor went through my body, my nerves seized, my muscles spasmed, and a suffocating rush of blood surged to my head, making me lightheaded with pain. I needed to see Eleanor up close, so I sat next to her in the class. However, after just one day with her, it felt like a crushing weight had been placed on my chest, pressing the life out of me. Desperation engulfed me, shattering any last foolish illusion I may have had about Elliot. Elliot was working in his studio when I arrived home, and when he heard me walk in, he called out impatiently from a distance, "You're home late. Get dinner started." "It's already late. Joseph will be back from school any minute." I was standing in the living room, peering through the studio's crack. Even at almost 70, Elliot maintained his erect stance and his presence, unaffected by aging. His skin had relaxed, but his sharply etched features were still remarkable, and there was a confidence and passion in the way he used his brush that might draw people in and make them completely lose themselves in him. When I didn't answer, he called out again, more impatiently. "What are you standing there for? Did you not hear me? Do you want your son to return home from a long day of work without dinner on the table, or should Joseph finish his homework without eating?" I forced myself to look away. Looking around the large living room, I saw that the walls were covered in pictures of us taken over the years as well as oil paintings that Elliot had created for the family. However, upon closer inspection, I noticed that not a single one of those paintings featured me. Instead, it was a smothering, bitter resentment that I had suppressed for years that finally made an appearance. I yelled, "Paint, paint, paint," and as soon as you got home, you locked yourself in that remote studio. "This house is solely mine, and I am responsible for these kids. You are now retired, Professor Harrington. What the devil are you doing, painting so compulsively?" Elliot stopped every day, taken aback by my outburst, and he was furious. He put down his brush angrily, saying there was nothing to talk about with someone as shallow as you. Art is a lifelong endeavor that requires dedication, but what would? You know about Elliot scowled at my aggression as I threw my bag on the floor and barged into his studio, pointing at the paintings in the living room. Well, now, Professor, you've spent decades painting portraits of everyone around you, so why isn't there a single one of me? I stared at him, and the cold that swept through me wasn't limited to my body at that moment. Jane, stop making a scene. Stay out of my studio, you're just a housewife, focus on your responsibilities. Why would I paint you? What's the point? Don't make a fool of yourself. I spent my entire life taking care of this house, raising your kids, and making sacrifices for you, but in the end, you only show me disdain. Tell me, Elliot Harrington, what is worth painting and why I'm only deserving of being the woman who cooks and cleans for you. God, Jane, what's up with you today? Did someone annoy you outside? Do me a favor and stop acting like a common street shrew by not bringing your petty, small-minded drama into this house. Elliot let out a short, frustrated breath and flung his brush away, spilling ink all over the canvas and onto the floor. I laughed in a self-deprecating way, but as I did, tears sprang out of my eyes. Elliot's face twisted in distaste, as though I were nothing more than a bother, and I couldn't help but ask whether he was painting Eleanor. The only thing that isn't shallow and shameful is that Elliot's face froze for the first time in years. He was still examining me closely with an unreadable expression, and I thought he might ask how I learned about Eleanor. Instead, he might panic and try to hide it by explaining his tracks or at the very least display a small amount of remorse because we had created this life together, decades of marriage, a house, kids, grandchildren, so there had to be some aspect of him that continued to cling to this family, no matter how small. Otherwise, why keep it a secret for 30 years and continue this affair in secret rather than going? My shock lasted only a second before it transformed into something far more visceral, his eyes burning with fury, his entire body tensing as if I had committed the ultimate transgression. But what I didn't anticipate, what I couldn't have anticipated, was the sheer unfiltered rage that flashed across his face. This was different from the usual annoyance, condescension, or dismissive impatience I'd become used to over the years. It was the kind of rage a man experiences when something important to him is threatened. Jane. I'm warning you, he snarled, his voice low and shaking with barely contained anger. I don't care what kind of my anger was extinguished like a candle in the wind when I looked at him, his eyes burning, his whole being coiled in defense of another woman, and he felt like a stranger to me in that moment. Of tantrum you throw at me, but do not under any circumstances disrupt Eleanor's life. Slept in the same bed for decades, or was the role I played as this so-called wife just a dream? It felt like I was stuck in a long, cruel dream that was so intense and unrelenting that I had taken it for real. Elliot continued to talk, his voice rising in agitation. I'm telling you, Eleanor and you are just friends who share similar interests. She owns a gallery, and I invested a small portion of it. I send over a few paintings occasionally, and it's a good way to spread my reputation and the money I make. I give you every cent of it, don't I? We're both old, Jane, all but dying. What the hell? Or I would go looking for Eleanor as if I were afraid, and he would go on, explaining and defending a man who was normally so reserved and rarely wasted words. Now, he was a broken record, repeating himself over and over again, desperate to shield her. He screamed, "This isn't what you think it is, honestly. At our age, don't you have any shame?" He then stomped up the stairs and whirled on his heel, leaving the studio. A second later, the bedroom door slammed shut with a loud thud. Silence descended upon the home, so deep that I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking. Slowly, I leaned against Elliot's desk, my legs giving way as I sank slowly to the floor, my body, worn down by years of sacrifice and stress, protesting with a dull deep moan, and then I just let myself fall, landing in an embarrassing heap. Like a clown in a traveling circus, but without any audience, laughter, or anything else to call it, it was pitiful. Shortly after that, my phone began ringing non-stop, dragging me out of my day. Was my son, so I forced myself to stop crying and respond, only to have one's piercing, impatient voice accuse me without hesitation. Mom and Dad just called me in a rage, telling me that we wouldn't be eating dinner at home tonight and that we should go out instead. He said that you lost your mind over nothing and that you wouldn't cook, so what the hell are you doing? Are you having a late night? You're in your 60s, so why are you even having a tantrum about something that your father has already explained? Aunt Eleanor is educated and sophisticated, and she has a profound appreciation for art. They're just kindred spirits, so please stop being so worried. I already deal with enough stress at work, you don't need to cause trouble and make the house intolerable. His words came to me like a series of slaps, each one colder, harsher, and more contemptuous than the last. There wasn't even the slightest hint of appreciation for the years I had given up for this family. To him, my efforts were just I let out a small, resentful laugh before asking, I see one Harrington, would you dare speak to your mother-in-law like this? There was a loud clatter on the other end of something. I had assumed that my existence was nothing more than an extension of my duties. Falling, possibly knocked down in his sudden rage, his voice erupted, furious Mom, if you're sick, go see a doctor, if you're feeling ill, go take a nap. What the hell is my mother-in-law involved in this? She's a successful businesswoman who is currently running a company. What do you have to do? Contrast that with that, and then he hung up. I looked up just in time to see Elliot coming downstairs, already dressed to go out, and he looked at me with nothing but disgust and annoyance. Stay home and think about yourself, he snapped. He didn't wait for my answer before grabbing his shoes, pulling the door open, and slamming it shut behind him. The house went silent once more. I let out a shaky breath and looked at the counter, where his heart medication was sitting. He had forgotten it in his haste to leave. I'm too old for this nonsense. I'm going out to eat. I was still feeling angry, so I instinctively grabbed the bottle as I ran after him. Just as I was about to grab the door handle, I heard him outside, talking on the phone. My old hag at home lost her damn mind today, he said in an irritated tone. Eleanor, I hope she didn't frighten you, PA. Then he sighed in relief, you don't know who she is, good. It's better that way, she's just some crazy old bat who spends her life cooking and cleaning, nothing worth knowing. He laughed lightly as my grasp tightened on the doorknob. In any case, I haven't eaten yet, have you? If not, I'll stop by the gallery and we can discuss the plans for the fall exhibition. The car engine roared to life, and Elliot drove away with a loud, annoying rumble. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cold seeping into my bones and creeping through my limbs. In my clenched hand, the bottle of heart medication dug into my palm, its edges pressing deeply into my skin. Just then, my phone screen illuminated, with a new message from Joseph, my grandson's grandfather, saying, you and Grandpa had a fight, you better stop if you want to avoid conflict. Grandpa gets very upset and doesn't want you anymore. You're going to get into a lot of trouble. A child's innocent, thoughtless words revealed a truth that was sharper than any blade. Even in a child's mind, a grandmother without a job or independence was just a housekeeper who was dependent on Grandpa and could be easily thrown out. Numbly, I went back inside, approached my desk, and opened my laptop. There, I found my marriage certificate, financial records, and, at last, the divorce agreement. I printed it out and put it neatly on Elliot's desk. After packing a few things, I headed to the apartment I had bought years prior as an investment before I got. When I finally lay down on the bed, I couldn't help but wonder if my life had turned out the same way or if I had also lost all traces of who I once was. My phone buzzed nonstop with missed calls and messages, and my once immaculate modern space had aged into something worn and neglected. For the first time in decades, I blocked them all because they all made the same accusations. I was acting like a rebellious teenager running away from home, and I was too old to be acting like that. I was in my own space, and I let myself sleep for decades before dawn, working tirelessly since I was actually 5 years younger than Elliot when we first met. I was the prettiest girl in town, and boys would chase after me in an attempt to gain my favor. However, the years of sleepless nights had worn me down and made me appear much older than I actually was. Was just teaching art at the neighborhood public elementary school. His parents had perished in a wildfire, leaving him without a home, money, or even nice clothes to wear. Despite his misfortune, he maintained the quiet haughtiness of an artist who was aloof, and I guess that's what eventually drew me to him, his quiet confidence and unwavering pride in spite of his circumstances. Back then, struggling artists were viewed as worthless fools who had no money, stability, or future to offer. People made fun of him, bullied him, and called him a lost cause. Began secretly feeding him and making sure he had something warm to eat. I used every penny I saved to buy him eggs and vegetables so he would have enough food to survive. Eventually, Elliot left our small town for college, and even though we weren't engaged, I took care of him, his laundry, his meals, and everything else. I married him without hesitation, even though I didn't have a wedding, financial security, or the support of friends or family, so he could concentrate on his studies and his art without any distractions later. I still remember how he held my hands back and looked at me with nothing but devotion. Jane, marrying you is the greatest honor of my life, and now, decades later, I had turned into the most disgusting thing in his world. After a few days of rest, my body and mind started to heal, and clarity settled in as the haze of years of neglect and sacrifice lifted. In order to see things for what they really were, I called Elliot at that moment because I was standing on the apartment balcony watering the little potted plants I had picked up to brighten the place, and I curled my lips into a faint smile. He picked up his voice, but it carried a note of reluctant compromise. Jane, come home, the whole house is a mess without you. Before Elliot could reply, Juan's voice abruptly took over the line, full of frustration. Mom Susie and I are both overworked, and Joseph has no one to look after him when he gets home from work. You know, I think I'd like to take a few years To live for myself. Whatever happens to that house is no longer my concern. I looked down at my hands, which had cleaned floors, prepared meals, and folded laundry and once were soft and delicate but were now filthy. I went from school to an empty house and ate fast food every night, and my dad doesn't even have clean clothes to wear. The place is a disaster. Please stop now and return. Wrinkled and rough from years of unappreciated work, I won't be returning, and my voice was steady. I gave up everything for years to support your father's dream, and you all rejected me as a crazy, unreasonable woman. Now that you're an adult and have your own family, you should understand how difficult it is more than anyone else. You should understand how draining it is to care for others in order to maintain a household, but instead of feeling thankful, all you feel is entitlement. You believe that I was born to be your caregiver and to serve this family well, but I took a deep breath and decided to study myself. Going forward, don't get in touch with me unless it's absolutely necessary. I've lived my entire life for other people, it's time for me to live for myself. Elliot refused to consent to the divorce, and Juan, on the other hand, criticized me via phone calls and texts for being an elderly woman acting inappropriately. I chose to ignore all of this and instead hired a lawyer, giving him complete authority to file for divorce in the interim. I withdrew from the painting course at the Lifelong Learning Institute, and after doing some research, I discovered a private flight school. The staff gaped at me as I completed the registration form and passed the medical exam, making me their oldest student. I also went to a posh cosmetic clinic and made a full enrollment package beauty treatment, after which I enrolled in classes on floral design and tea ceremony, which I had always wanted to do but had never permitted myself to do for the first half of my life. Despite Elliot's successful career and our family's constant financial stability, I had always been hard on myself, saving and scrimping. I put all of my love and patience into taking care of everyone, making sure that every dollar went toward their needs rather than mine. Looking back, I see how foolish I was, but there was a thrilling rush when I spent my own savings on myself guilt-free, finally enjoying the things I had been depriving myself of for so long. Elliot tried to get in touch with me frequently in an effort to start peaceful conversations, and he even visited my apartment a few times before being turned away by security. I had already told the property management to refuse him entry, so I didn't give him the chance to interfere with my new life because I was too busy making the one I deserved. My schedule quickly filled up, and every day was full of joy and purpose. I even started doing yoga, which helped me start losing the weight I had been carrying for years. Through these new experiences, I met amazing people who shared my values and were independent and full of life. We spent our afternoons drinking tea, playing poker, and sharing stories about how we had rediscovered ourselves. We packed up and went on a spontaneous trip to see the world's breathtaking beauty, but Elliot refused to cooperate with the divorce. With no agreement in sight, I met with my lawyer to talk about what to do next. The lawsuit, but before I could proceed, my wife, Susie, showed up out of the blue. She stood in the doorway of my newly renovated apartment, looking about at the comfortable, well-kept area and the fragrant flowers flowering on the balcony. I sighed deeply and looked into her eyes indifferently. "Susie, are you here to persuade me to return and serve you as your unpaid servant once more?" she questioned, blinking in surprise at my directness for a time before gently shaking her head. "Perhaps at first, but Jane, I changed my mind the moment I saw you today." Her voice was quiet, almost reflective. "You're not like the woman I've known for all these years, and I think I finally understand why you made this decision." Her words surprised me for the first time in a long time, and after a pause, I felt something stir inside of me. My voice softened. "Sweetie, we probably won't see each other very often in the future, but if you ever need assistance, especially with money, go ask Elliot to hire a professional housekeeper. This free maid is fully retired as of right now, so another calm week has gone by." When I got home from my beauty treatment that afternoon, I saw two people waiting outside my building. As if they could sense my approach, they both turned to face me at the same moment, and Eleanor was standing there as calm and collected as ever. Her eyes were devoid of any animosity or condescension, just a serene expression. Elliot was at her side, timid and meek like a docile house cat, and he looked nothing like the confident professor he once was. The moment he saw me, he halted, taking in my appearance with a genuinely startled expression, as if he hadn't expected my change to be so dramatic that it took him a few long seconds to confirm that it was indeed me. Then, in a sudden rush, he stepped forward, his hands firmly grasping my shoulders, and for the first time in years, his aging face was filled with desperation and longing. "Jan, I've finally been." He had not been doing well, but the most unexpected thing was that I felt nothing, not sympathy, not rage, not the traces of love, and I came here only to see you. I examined him. His jeans were stained with oil, and his shirt was wrinkled and obviously unpressed. Why exactly are the Jane who previously revolved about this guy, who had dedicated her life to him, was long gone, and Elliot tensed at my lack of interest. His grasp faltered for the first time, and he seemed ashamed. You were searching for me, but my voice sounded distant and detached. I brought Eleanor with me today on purpose so she could explain and tell you directly that there is nothing wrong between us. If that helped, I almost laughed and pried his hands off him. At last, he spoke, almost begging, please, Jane, don't be mad anymore. The house can't function without you. My shoulders slowly and consciously, Elliot. Whatever is between us has nothing to do with anybody else. To be clear, Eleanor is not the reason I want to leave you, but he persisted. I know I was wrong, he hurried on. I'll help you out more around the house, I swear. Let's stop fighting. We've been together for a long time, Jane, and getting divorced now would only make us look foolish. Let's go home, it's time, I laughed. I tilted my head again, saying, listen to yourself, as if housework had always been my responsibility and you were helping me out. Have you ever wondered why that was my job in the first place? Elliot's face darkened, and he was starting to lose patience. I came here to find you, Jane. What more do you want? I said I'd share the housework, and I'd be more understanding. Enough is enough, I say to him. Eleanor, who had been silent the entire time, gently tugged on Elliot's arm and then said, that's enough, Elliot, in a soft but firm voice. Calm down, let me talk to Jane, and to my utter surprise, the man who had been expressionless suddenly felt exhausted and no longer interested in explaining anything to him. Eleanor, who had just been disputing with me, instantly backed down like a well-trained pet and listened to her. She wore a silk dress that fit her effortlessly, and she had the peaceful confidence of someone who had never had to defend herself in front of others. Kind of wealth that didn't need to be displayed. She easily met my eyes and said, we were classmates once, and for at least one day we were friends. Would you please do me the courtesy of a conversation in the cafe next to my apartment? As if she had nothing to feel bad about, Jane. Two elderly women sat opposite one another in a quiet altercation. Eleanor broke the silence after a few minutes, absently tucking a stray hair behind her ear and smiling elegantly. I believe you might have misinterpreted my relationship with she started lightly, and maybe there was a time when we were young and felt more than just friendship. But that was a long time ago, and I didn't say anything, I just watched her, waiting for her to utter what she wanted to say. I never married, she added, but I always saw. When I first met Elliot, I was drawn to his uniqueness and talent. We had similar passions and goals, and we had a lot to discuss. However, Elliot has always been a man of responsibility, and we have never done anything to betray you. I wanted to dedicate my life to art, so I saw marriage as a cage. Tilting my head, I inquired, what exactly constitutes a betrayal? Sharp and unrestrained, slicing through her carefully constructed narrative, does it mean that as long as you didn't cross that last line, I can swallow my grievances and accept the fact that Elliot's heart was never really with me for decades caused Eleanor's smile to falter just a little, the warmth in her face becoming rigid and unnatural. That's not what I meant when she said that, her voice still being smooth but noticeably more cautious. I just wanted to make sure you understood. I shook my head and spoke in a calm tone. Unbothered, you don't have to. The truth is, I don't care anymore whether you two exchanged words for 30 years or more. What I resent isn't that you were in his life, but rather that I wasted so many years of my life on a man who was never worthy. Leaning back and closely observing her, and let's face it, Elliot and even my own kids find it difficult to comprehend why I'm deciding to leave at such a late age. You all believe that I should just put up with it and let things continue as they are, but the truth is, Eleanor, I don't need your sympathy or anyone else's, she said, still grinning. If you really didn't blame him, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and you wouldn't be so angry. That's why I'm upset. Eleanor had already regained her composure, smoothing over whatever crack had momentarily appeared in her polished facade. Jane. I just refuse to leave this world carrying regrets, because I want to find the me I lost. I indicated to the waiter that there was nothing wrong between us, paid for our coffee, and stood looking down at her. I spoke with a quiet, deliberate certainty that whether or not I blamed him was not my concern, and Eleanor, this is not your battle to fight, but don't I'll be free of him soon, so any romantic ideas you two may have may finally emerge from the shadows, whether it's a body-to-body union or a meeting of the minds, whatever you decide, it won't worry me anymore. Without saying anything else, I turned to leave the cafe, where Elliot was waiting outside. As I passed, he instinctively reached out to grab my hand, but I sidestepped him easily, and Eleanor quickly followed, slipping to his side naturally. His face was tired, lined with exhaustion and something that almost looked like regret. The two of them stood together, framed against the setting sun and the same selfishness, the same pretense, the same carefully constructed image of refinement. As I turned to Elliot one last time, my voice remained calm and unyielding. A guy and an elegant woman, their silver hair catching the light, their presence seamlessly matched at a glance. You're nearly 70 years old, Harrington, and you've spent your entire life deceiving yourself, Perhaps you even think you've done the right thing by keeping me around despite your wandering heart, telling yourself that your self-control was an indication of integrity, but let me be clear, I don't buy it. We were married for more than 40 years. Years passed, and for 30 of those years, your focus was elsewhere. You still attempt to conceal it and refuse to face the truth. I feel sorry for you because of that. I turned on my heel and left, never looking back. After that, my flight lessons were going incredibly well, and everyone at the academy knew about me. After a white-haired grandmother in her 60s defied expectations by learning to fly, the younger students became even more motivated, and their excitement was contagious. Some even, with my consent, recorded my training sessions and uploaded them online, which shocked me when the videos went viral. Before I knew it, I had become the grandmother pilot, who was a local internet sensation and an unexpected inspiration. Finally lost his patience and stormed into my apartment, his face red with anger and his voice sharp with accusations. Mom, have you gone completely insane, and why are you humiliating me? I looked at him, the son I had raised, the boy I had made so many sacrifices for, and all I could feel was a cold, crushing disappointment. Do you have any idea what kind of shame you've brought on this family? You've made our home a mess, and you don't feel ashamed enough of this nonsense. Come home and do what you're supposed to do. You're no longer a child, but it's obvious that I failed to raise you. I must not have taught you respect because you stand here now speaking to the mother who gave you life as if she were beneath you. I said in a steady but distant voice. One person gave me a scathing laugh, his eyes sweeping me from head to toe. You're a parasite in the Harrington family, sneered. If it weren't for my father, where would you be? Do you really think you'd have had such a comfortable life? You were just a backwater nobody. You should be thankful that you were able to marry my dad and be there for him for all these years. It's the best thing ever happened to you, and now you believe that getting a few beauty treatments, losing a little weight, and getting fancy hobbies makes you more sophisticated. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness, rather, they were tears of pure, unfiltered disgust. I shook my head as I looked at the stranger and one slapped his hands down on the table, his face contorted with anger, and yelled, Jane Moore, from this day on. If that's how you see me, I answered, my voice trembling but resolute, then go. Find yourself a mother who suits your tastes, but don't ever come looking for me again. Going forward, you are not my mother. I gave you an opportunity to return, but you declined. When you realize your error, you crawl back and don't dare ask for anything from me or my father. Then, in a final outburst of rage, he kicked over the trash can in my living room, sending its contents flying across the floor. I stood in the ruins of the moment, watching as dust and debris settled in the air, and then he was gone, the door slamming behind him. I felt a deep, raw pain that pulsed through my chest like a wound torn open, but after the pain came something else, because I had finally seen them all for who they were. If I had one regret, it would be that I should have woken up earlier. On the way home from my last floral arrangement class, I passed a shopping mall and chose to stop. I felt nothing but gratitude that I had chosen to leave while I still had time. I went in to buy some new vases to replace the old ones in my apartment, and as soon as I walked in, I noticed that Elliot was swooning over Eleanor, who was carrying her bags while she strolled through the store. Behind them, Juan, Susie, and their child were following them, obviously enjoying a successful shopping spree. Eleanor, you have the best taste, someone remarked admiringly. The clothes you chose for us today are so fashionable, and I'll wear mine to work tomorrow. Everyone will be surprised. Eleanor smiled politely. You look like your father, so you should dress to complement your inherent beauty. Elegance Ocean laughed and smiled at the compliment, saying, not like my mom, who always bought me those cheap, ugly clothes with no sense of style. Elliot Ever, Eleanor's devoted companion, gave her a thermos cup and gave her a tender shoulder massage. You must be. I was exhausted after today, so I drank some water, went to eat dinner, and rested. I watched the situation from a distance, my lips twisting into a derisive smirk. They had never liked going shopping with me because they said I was overweight and too frumpy, and that walking next to me in public was. Susie, who had been quiet and expressionless up until that point, abruptly spoke up, asking how it was possible to discuss your mother in such a way. It was embarrassing because on the few times we did go out together, they would always keep their distance as if we weren't even family. An irritated glare, you don't understand, stop being so naive, and learn from Aunt Eleanor. Eleanor raised an eyebrow and gave Susie a calculating look. After a moment, she took a jewelry box out of one of the shopping bags and gave it to Susie. This is for you, Susie. I believe we get along. I hope we can stay close, but Susie didn't take it well and instead gave Eleanor a chilly look. As Jane and Elliot haven't even finalized their divorce yet, don't you think this is a little inappropriate? At the very least, wait until everything is. Eleanor's face flushed before she assumes the role of the legitimate woman by his side. She waved a hand dismissively, clearly caught off guard. Elliot and I just have a strong connection, I've always believed in remaining independent, and I'm not interested in marriage. Elliot's blissful expression faltered, looking completely stunned as if he had never expected Eleanor to say such words in front of Juan and Susie. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Nothing more, whether Jane and Elliot divorce, or not, has anything to do with me. Please, please, don't make it sound like I'm trying to claim him for the first time. Susie laughed as she turned to leave, but as soon as she did, she looked at me across the store, and everyone else followed, their faces contorted into various expressions of astonishment, shame, and unease. I casually adjusted. Elliot, I said, effortlessly as I strolled toward them with my freshly cut hair and my heels tapping against the polished floor. Since I saw you here, there's no need for me to call the court hearing for our divorce, which is set for next Monday. Please make sure to be there on time. There won't be any more games or delays. Then I turned to Susie and gave her a gentle pat before saying, get this done so you can finally welcome your soulmate into your life properly. My voice was soft but firm, and I said, think carefully about your future. If you're smart, you'll leave him sooner rather than later. Later, before you waste your entire life the way I did. I turned and left without turning around. Following our last hearing, Elliot and I finally came to an agreement. The judge declared that our divorce was final and that the decree would be sent to us shortly. As we left the courthouse, Elliot paused. Then, with a sharp, derisive laugh, I said, you never wanted a divorce, you just wanted a wife at home to cook and clean for you while keeping a kindred spirit on the side. Jane, did you believe me when I said that I never wanted to divorce you? She reached out and tugged lightly at my sleeve. Enjoy your small creative dreams, Jane. His face grew hot before going pale. Why have you become so resentful? He screamed. Be honest with yourself. Have I ever mistreated you? I earned money and gave it all to you. I always arrived home on time. I never even got into a fight with you over what else do you want, Eleanor? I waved a dismissive hand, saying that there was nothing more to say and that we had reached the end of these chats. Elliot Harrington, I made sure to mention his entire name as though I were speaking to a stranger, so please take care of yourself. I walked away because I had much more important things to do than stand here and argue with a man who had never really seen me. I focused entirely on my flight training, my new life, and my new dreams after that. By chance, a local television station heard about my story and eagerly reached out. They said, I love the idea, so I agreed to be featured on a show that would inspire people who, like me, had lost themselves and their families and forgotten how to live for themselves. The show aired shortly after, setting records for its time slot, and I was an elderly woman wearing a sleek flight suit, sunglasses, and a headset. Glittering as I flew over the open sky, it wasn't easy, but it was enough to garner enough attention that soon the internet was overflowing with comments referring to me as Blue Sky Grandma. At one point, the show even followed me home and filmed my day-to-day activities. An astute observer spotted an old family portrait in the backdrop, hidden away in a neglected corner, collecting dust. Curious, some viewers looked further and connected it to Elliot's former place of employment, piecing together the specifics of our divorce. Then, the true rumors began to circulate. Evidently, it was well known even before the divorce that the esteemed Professor Harrington frequently spent time in his art studio with an enigmatic woman. The two would paint together, two souls lost in their world, and it didn't take long for the internet to discover Eleanor in her gallery. Even when Elliot tried to maintain a low profile in public by wearing hats and scarves, someone would always recognize him because the whispers followed him everywhere he went. Shameless and heartless, he betrayed the woman. This is similar to how that old professor's decades-long affair became a popular topic. Elliot and I are just friends, we have never done anything wrong. I would never meddle in a married man's home. Please stop the accusations, I welcome them. Eleanor, who supported him for decades, was the first to break under pressure. She stepped in front of a camera, tears sparkling in her eyes, scrutinizing. I have nothing to conceal, but nobody thought. Her people had already figured out how she twisted the facts without lying overtly, and the criticism was so intense that her gallery soon lost business clients. Within months, investors withdrew, forcing her to close it down because she could no longer handle the attention. Eleanor discreetly packed her luggage and got ready to leave the city, but at the airport, someone noticed her and captured it on camera. When Elliot appeared more haggard than ever, he hurried to stop her. The video went viral on social media within hours. Eleanor, you can't just leave Elliot, he begged desperately. What about me? I divorced Jane for you, and soon nobody will care. Elliot was left standing as Eleanor pulled her arm away from him, her face contorted with disdain. You used to be elegant, she snarled. You dressed well and carried yourself with dignity, but look at you now, unkempt, filthy, and pathetic. With a flick of my finger, I closed the video, astonished as though she had just broken his entire world. Instead, I returned my focus to the flowers on my balcony, rearranging their arrangement in the afternoon sunlight, when a fresh message from Susie Mom appeared on my phone. I'm filing for divorce from Juan, I don't want my son to grow up with him as a role model." I chuckled and typed back a single word, "Good." The years went by, and Elliot looked for me innumerable times, but I never saw him. He also frequently reached out to me, expressing his regret for everything and his hope that I would forgive him. My life was peaceful and fulfilling for another year until Elliot, who had always been in good health, suddenly suffered a stroke. I told him this while I was in the middle of a business meeting with him. "If you regret it, then provide well for Susie and be a responsible father." Even though my career was still in the past, I made time in my schedule to visit my flight academy instructor at the hospital when I arrived because we were talking about a promotional partnership, and I had been selected as their brand ambassador. Together, we were getting ready to launch a full-scale industry chain. I leaned down to look at Elliot as he lay in bed, his once sharp features warped by illness, his mouth sagging, saliva pooling at the corner of his lips, and even speaking incoherently now. He had once been a proud and passionate artist, the man I had once loved so much, the man for whom I had time spares no one, least of all those who must finally reap what they have sown. I stood there in silence as memories of the young man I met in our small town flashed through my mind. Given everything, his arrogance had disappeared, his gaze was vacant, and his mouth was twisted in frustration as he struggled to form words. And I had run a household for decades, believing in him, only to realize that I had been nothing more than a shadow in his life. As I looked at him now, frail and broken, alone, I felt no guilt about the sacrifices I made so he could follow his dreams, the family we built together, his rising success, and his growing reputation. With a silent sigh, I reached into my bag, removed a fresh handkerchief, and carefully wiped the drool off his chin. His eyes switched to me, filled with something I had never seen before, sorrow, regret, perhaps even humiliation, but below it all was pride, hatred, satisfaction, and closure still persisted. Lying helpless in a hospital bed, unable to let go of the man he once was, I calmly spoke, "Do you remember what you told me when we got married?" His lips quivered, "But you said nothing." I smiled a little, without sadness, without anger, just resignation. "But in the end, Elliot, you never really valued that honor." His eyes fluttered, and a little tremor went through his fingers. "That marrying me was the greatest honor of your life." His hands were once strong and warm, capable of creating beauty, but now they were thin and fragile, speckled with age and drained of life. "The doctors say you'll survive," I told him quietly, but his skeletal hand trembled and reached for mine a little, but he no longer had the strength. He blinked quickly as if to question why. "It's not because I still love you, and it's not because I can't let go," I said, shaking my head. "It's because I refuse to become you. You'll need long-term care, and I won't be the one to provide it." He spent decades ignoring me and mistreating me. I let out a little breath, "But I won't let resentment devour me the way it destroyed you." I've already decided to forgive Elliot, whose eyes became desperate as he struggled to comprehend what I had said. "I feel like a supporting role in your life now that you finally understand what loneliness feels like." Once more to speak, but the sounds that came out were just broken, unintelligible syllables, and I didn't wait to hear them. I gently let go of his hand, got to my feet, and took a step back, saying, "Take care of yourself, Elliot." I gave him one last look before turning and leaving the hospital, taking a deep breath as the sun warmed my face. Skin's golden light encircled me like an embrace, and I tipped my head back to feel the warmth seeping into areas of me that had been cold for too long. I had been free for so long, trapped in a marriage that erased me, and I had voluntarily set aside my dreams and aspirations, persuading myself that my purpose was to serve, sacrifice, and endure. However, I had discovered how to live for myself and was no longer a woman bound to anyone else. I was fearless, independent, and filled with the limitless potential of Jane. On my way home, I took a detour through the flight academy, where I stood. "Jane, you arrived at the ideal moment." My instructor walked toward me, smiling, and put his hand on my shoulder. "He gave me your private pilot's license." As he looked at the sleek, gleaming planes lined up in front of me, their wings reaching toward the sky. I had not experienced such excitement in decades. "Has been authorized, you're now officially prepared to fly alone tomorrow." I grinned and kept my eyes steady while gazing up at the wide blue sky. If I were to fly alone tomorrow, I would zip up my flight suit, put on my sunglasses, and my hands tightened over the controls in my headset as I entered the cockpit, and as the plane taxied forward, my pulse sped in tune with the rumble below. The tower's voice came through clear and steady. "Blue sky grandma, you are cleared for departure." I sighed, my lips curling slightly in understanding. The plane roared ahead as I pushed the throttle forward, gathering speed, wheels lifting off the ground, and suddenly I was in the air, breaking free from the boundaries of the earth and soaring higher and higher into the open sky. My heart lifted with me for the rest of my life. I looked down at the world beneath the suffering, betrayals, and tears of my past and realized that I would no longer be restricted in kitchens, bound in routines, and burdened by other people's expectations. It was all insignificant and helpless, in comparison to the lady I had become, so I spread my arms outstretched, embracing the boundless sky and my independence because it's never too late.